You're starting to question everything right now in this very moment because something inside you has finally woken up, something that has been dormant for years while you were just functioning. This isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. And if you're asking yourself, am I on the right path? You already are, because the person who is truly lost never asks for directions, they just keep sleeping. Let's explore the 5 signs that prove your soul is guiding you, even if your logical mind is still fighting back. These aren't signs you can measure in achievements or bank statements, but in the quiet, profound transformation of who you are becoming. You will finally understand why the storms in your life didn't shatter you, but sculpted you. Why your solitude isn't a void, but a sacred space for becoming. And why you've stopped needing to justify your existence. These 5 signs don't just reveal that you're on the right path. They show you that you have already arrived at what Carl Jung called the self, that inner core that doesn't scream for attention but which you will never be able to ignore again. Let's start with the very thing you might fear and misunderstand the most, the doubt itself. Because the doubt you feel right now isn't your enemy. It's your North Star. When your life was on autopilot, you never questioned a thing. You got up, you performed your duties, you met the expectations set for you. No friction, no internal static. And then one day, a crack appeared in the perfectly smooth facade. That moment you paused mid-task and a whisper echoed from deep within. Is this it? Is this all there is? That question is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's the sign that you are finally waking up. Doubt doesn't arise because you're weak. It arises because you've become strong enough to handle the truth. The truth that for years you've been living a life that was a costume, a life designed to please others, one that promised security and guaranteed a sense of belonging. But it was never yours. And now, you look around and see people who seem to have no doubts. They are so certain in their beliefs, their 5-year plans, their unshakable convictions, and you feel adrift. Like you're the only one who doesn't have the map. But don't you see what's really happening? Those people don't doubt because they are still asleep. They haven't yet been touched by that inner voice that interrogates everything. You are doubting because you are awake, and being awake hurts before it sets you free. There's that secret middle-of-the-night thought. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I'm imagining things, connecting dots that aren't there. Maybe I'm too sensitive, too intense, too much. You see the subtle energy shifts in a room that others ignore. You feel the unspoken words hanging in the air. You perceive the invisible currents of life. And it scares you because no one in your circle talks about this. No one seems to be experiencing the world with this strange new depth. But let me tell you something. The crazy ones aren't those who awaken. The crazy ones are those who continue to sleepwalk through life, pretending that the charade is real. You are not unwell. You are profoundly, terrifyingly alive. And then comes the question that haunts your quiet hours. What if I'm wasting my life? What if I'm getting it all wrong? What if this new, uncertain path leads to absolutely nowhere? This question isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you are finally taking ownership of your existence. You're no longer willing to be a passenger. Jung argued that the purpose of life isn't to be happy by avoiding pain, but to become whole by integrating it. And that process of becoming whole always begins with doubt. With the fundamental question, is this truly me, or am I just the reflection of what others wanted me to be? The 5 signs we are about to explore are not trophies to be displayed. They aren't external accolades or validation from the outside world. They are internal shifts, transformations so subtle that only you can feel them. But when you recognize them, you will know. You are not lost. You are finding your way home. The first sign is the most difficult to accept because it feels like an ending, but it's a beginning. Your crises have become more profound, and they have fundamentally changed you. Perhaps it was a relationship ending that brought you to your knees, a devastating loss, a health scare, a career that imploded. Something that tore the fabric of your known reality apart. And in that moment, you thought, this is the end of me. But you didn't die. You walked through that abyss. And when you emerged on the other side, you were not the same person. You were not broken. You were forged. Jung spoke of neurosis as the suffering of a soul that has not yet discovered its meaning. A crisis is the moment your soul slams on the brakes and forces you to look at what you've been avoiding, what you've suppressed, the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. The crisis isn't the problem. The crisis is the solution disguised as a problem. It demolishes the false structures in your life so that your authentic self has room to grow. This first sign also manifests in how you now handle setbacks. In the past, any small difficulty would derail you completely. Now you see a lesson in every stumble. You understand that the soul grows in the darkness of the valley, not on the sunlit peak of the mountain. That every crisis doesn't make you weaker, but more dense, more real. It's like being passed through a fire that burns away the dross, leaving behind more of your essential golden nature each time. You used to search for quick fixes, for distractions, for easy comfort, for anything to numb the pain. But you don't do that anymore. You hold the tension. You stay in the fire because you have an intuitive sense that something greater is being forged within you. You know that true transformation isn't a quick change act. It has to move through you, not around you. This is the difference between someone who collapses and gets back up only to repeat the same patterns, and someone who is fundamentally reborn through the ordeal. You're not going back. You're moving forward. Every crisis you've endured has peeled back a layer of your false self, a layer of social conditioning, of inherited expectations, of the roles you thought you had to play. And with every layer that falls away, you get closer to what lies beneath it all. Your true self. This is what Jung called individuation. The process where you stop being a copy and start becoming an original. Your crises are not your enemies. They are your midwives. And as you move through these transformations, something strange begins to happen. You start to withdraw, not out of fear, not out of depression, but out of a newfound sense of clarity. This is the second sign. You have started to value solitude more than social validation. There was a moment when you realized you'd rather stay home, rather read a book, journal your thoughts, or simply be with yourself than go to another party, another networking event, another gathering where you have to perform. And the people around you started to notice. They say you've changed. You've become distant, isolated. In the past, that would have stung. You would have defended yourself, tried to fit back in. But now their comments don't touch you. Not because you've grown cold, but because you know they cannot possibly understand the sacred inner work you're doing. You've discovered that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is the pain of absence. Aloneness is the joy of presence. The presence of your own soul. In solitude, you find a companionship deeper than any conversation you could have across a crowded dinner table. You find the voice that was buried beneath all the noise. The voice that knows who you are. The voice that doesn't judge, doesn't compare, doesn't demand. It simply is. This second sign also reveals itself in how you manage your energy. You suddenly realize that certain interactions leave you feeling completely drained while silence nourishes you. You now consciously choose where you invest your presence. This isn't arrogance. It's self-preservation. It's born from the deep recognition that your inner world is a precious landscape, And not everyone deserves a key to the garden you are cultivating in the quiet. Jung wrote that the process of individuation demands a temporary withdrawal from the collective. You cannot dive into the depths of your own ocean and simultaneously skim the surface with everyone else. You must pull back to find yourself. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of spiritual maturity, the mark of someone who has understood that belonging at any cost is a form of self-betrayal. And you are no longer willing to betray yourself. The silence is no longer threatening to you, it is sacred. In it you hear what is drowned out by the noise of the world, the truth, your truth. And while others flee from this silence because it would force them to meet themselves, you now seek it out, because you have learned that only in stillness does clarity emerge. Only in stillness can you distinguish between what you truly feel and what you've been told you should feel. And with this clarity comes something that once would have terrified you, but now liberates you. The third sign: you have lost the fear of being misunderstood. There was a time when you would spend hours trying to explain yourself, justifying your decisions, rationalizing your changes, defending your path. You desperately wanted them to understand, to see why you were doing what you were doing, why you had become different. But they didn't. And the more you explained, the more of a stranger you became to them. Until one day you just stopped. You stopped explaining, not out of resignation, but out of a profound acceptance. You accepted that you don't need to be understood to be valid. The need to belong is wired so deeply into our psyche that for years we will amputate parts of ourselves just to fit in. We adapt, we conform, we make ourselves smaller, quieter, less visible, just so they will accept us. But at some point the price becomes too high. At some point you feel your soul withering inside that cage of conformity. And then you make the hardest and most liberating decision of your life. You accept that you may not belong with them anymore, that you are different, and that this is no longer a wound, but an identity. This third sign manifests as a quiet, unshakable inner sovereignty. You no longer defend yourself. You no longer justify your choices. You simply exist in your truth without feeling the need to prove it to anyone. This posture doesn't come from indifference, but from deep self-knowledge. You know who you are. And that knowledge doesn't require external validation to be real. Jung himself was ridiculed by the scientific community of his day. His ideas about the collective unconscious, archetypes, and dreams were dismissed as mystical, unscientific, even crazy. But he continued on his path. He followed his inner truth, even when the world didn't understand him. And today, decades later, we see the profound wisdom in his work, not because he conformed, but because he remained true to himself. You now take action even when you know others will judge you. You make choices that make no logical sense to anyone else, but feel absolutely right in your soul. You leave the safe job. You end the relationship that was suffocating you. You move to a place that no one understands. And while they might think you're losing your mind, for the first time in your life, you feel like you've finally come home to yourself. You don't need their permission anymore. You don't need their applause. You don't need anyone to tell you that you're on the right track, because you can feel it. And this feeling isn't vague. It's precise. It's physical. The fourth sign: you feel physical discomfort when you betray your own essence. Maybe it's a tension headache that appears out of nowhere, a tightness in your chest, a lump in your throat, stomach pain, a sudden wave of exhaustion that has no medical explanation. And you've started to notice the pattern. This physical signal always arrives when you are doing something that is out of alignment with your truth, when you tell a small white lie, when you agree to something your soul is screaming no to, when you stay in a room with people whose energy is toxic. Your body knows the truth long before your mind is willing to admit it. You can no longer force a smile in environments that feel draining. You can no longer nod in agreement when your inner compass is pointing in the opposite direction. You can no longer wear the masks even when you know it would make things easier. Your body refuses. It sabotages your attempts to conform. It forces you to be honest. Jung described how the psyche somatizes what remains unresolved, how the body becomes the mouthpiece for the soul when the soul is not heard, and your body is now speaking loud and clear. It is saying, no, not anymore, not this way. This fourth sign is perhaps the most tangible of all. It is the infallible wisdom of the body. While your mind is still negotiating, still trying to find compromises, still making excuses, your body rebels. It has become your strictest teacher, your most incorruptible advisor. It no longer allows you to lie to yourself. And in its uncompromising stance, there is a profound grace. There might have been a moment when your body literally stopped you in your tracks, before you could make a decision that would have taken you further from yourself. A panic attack, a sudden illness, a creative block. You may have interpreted it as a weakness, but it was the opposite. It was your body protecting you. It was saying, if you go down that road, you go without me, and I will not let you go. This reconnection between your body and your truth is one of the most precious gifts of the individuation process. You are no longer fragmented. You are no longer trapped in your head while your body is screaming for attention. You are becoming one, and in this unity every lie becomes unbearable. Every act of self-betrayal becomes physically palpable. Your body has become your compass, and when it aches, you know, I've strayed from my path, and you correct your course, not out of rigid discipline, but out of a deep, abiding love for yourself. And as this reconnection solidifies, something else begins to open up, something you might not have expected. The fifth sign, you see beauty and meaning where you previously only saw chaos. The world hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. You walk down a street and see an old, gnarled tree you would have ignored a year ago. But now you stop. You see how its roots have buckled the concrete sidewalk, how its branches reach for the sky, despite being surrounded by buildings. And you suddenly understand that is me. That is my story. That tree is telling you about resilience, about being rooted, about growing against all odds. And you feel a connection that transcends words. A brief conversation with the cashier at the grocery store. A moment of eye contact with a stranger on the bus. A shared silence with a friend. In the past, these would have been insignificant moments. Now, they feel sacred. Because you have stopped taking the world literally. You have started to see the symbols. You see the patterns. You see the invisible threads of connection that hold everything together. Jung spoke of the symbolic function of the psyche, the ability to experience the world as a living tapestry of meaning. When you awaken, the world ceases to be a collection of random objects and events. It becomes a story that is speaking directly to you. A language of metaphors, signs, and synchronicities. You no longer just see the surface of things. You see the depth. You see the invisible shining through the visible. This fifth sign transforms your entire experience of reality. Suddenly, nothing is mundane. A raindrop on a window pane becomes a mirror for your own tears and your own cleansing. A child's laugh reminds you of the innocence you are striving to reclaim. A wilted flower shows you that letting go is not a defeat, but a necessary part of the cycle of life. The world has become a living book, and every moment is a page telling you something about yourself. A dead tree by the side of the road becomes a lesson in surrender and new beginnings. A crack in a wall becomes an image of your own broken places where the light gets in. A bird repeatedly flying into a glass window becomes a mirror for your own attempts to break through boundaries you can't see but can feel. The world has come alive, not because it has changed, but because you have. And in this living world, you no longer feel alone. You feel connected, connected to everything that is, to the trees, the stones, the people, the moments. You recognize that it is all part of one great narrative, and you are not here by accident. Every pain, every crisis, every period of loneliness has led you here, to this moment, to this understanding, to this profound connection. Life is no longer a series of random events happening to you. It is a story unfolding through you. A story in which you are not merely a spectator but the protagonist. And as you recognize this story, you also recognize you are on the right path, not because everything is easy, but because everything has meaning. You no longer ask the question, am I on the right path? Because you know. You know it in your bones, in your breath, in the quiet certainty that now resides within you. It is not a loud, arrogant certainty, it is a quiet one, but it is unshakable. The doubt was necessary. It pulled you out of the life that others had designed for you. It forced you to pause, to question, to feel. And by walking through that doubt, you have arrived at a certainty that is not based on opinions or external validation or success. It is based on truth, your truth. Jung called the self that inner center that regulates the psyche. It is not the ego which seeks approval, compares, and constantly needs to prove itself. It is the deep, quiet knowledge that rests within you, the knowledge that doesn't argue, that doesn't waver, that simply is. And you have finally reached it. You didn't reach it through external achievements. You reached it through inner work, through the willingness to look into the abyss, through the capacity to be alone, through the courage to be misunderstood, through listening to your body, through seeing the world with new eyes. You are on the right path, not because everything is solved, not because you have arrived at a final destination, but because you have stopped betraying yourself, because you have learned to hold the tension of becoming, because you know that transformation is not a goal, but a continuous process. And because you trust that process, you trust yourself. The freedom that comes from this is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't boast. It is simply there. The freedom of one who has accepted their own unique journey, without comparison, without hurry, without fear, only with the silent courage to be who you are, not who you were supposed to be, not who others want you to be, but who you at your very core have always been. That is the path, and you are already on it. If these words have resonated with you, if you have recognized yourself in these signs, let me know. Write in the comments which of these 5 signs spoke to you the most, and if you feel that this journey is not over, that there is more to discover on this path of becoming whole, then subscribe to this channel. Because here we will continue to talk about what lies beneath the surface, about what Jung called the journey to wholeness, about the shadows, the archetypes, the dreams, and the symbols that are shaping your life. You are not alone on this path, and the journey continues.